move on to apologies, and I'll move from the chair that we accept the apologies from Councillor Elder and Councillor Hall. Seconded Councillor Staines. There's no other apologies. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Confirmation of the agenda. I move from the chair that we confirm the public part of the agenda with the following alteration in regard to Standing Order 2.1 Option C be adopted in relation to the moving and seconding and speaking to amendment. Seconded Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Declarations of interest. This is a reminder, basically, and I'll move that the Council notes, if necessary, the elected members' interest register or confirms and amends. Councillor Gary.
Just noted that one of mine has dropped off, and that's Fortune Theatre Board Council appointment.
Right, thank you. Make a note of that. Any other alterations, Councillor Stedman? Oh, I see. It's not recorded and it ought to be, sorry. Oh, right. So I wonder if we could just take a note that they need to be checked. Obviously, because there's two councils at least who... So if you could pass that on by email to Pam, please, Councillors Stedman and Gary, and anyone else who notices that theirs may have disappeared as well. It's been moved and seconded that we note the register. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. And I'll move that we note the executive leadership team's interest register and confirm the proposed management plan for the executive leadership team's interests. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, on to the confirmation of minutes. Item 6.1, I'll move from the chair that we confirm that the council confirm the public part of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 11th and 13th of December 2017 as a correct record. Seconded Councillor Staines. Is there any discussion on that? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 6.2, I'll move that the council confirms the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on 11th to the 13th of December 2017, the 10-year plan meeting, as a correct record. Second to Councillor Staines. Any discussion on that? That's obviously two separate meetings on the same days. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. And item 6.3, I'll move that the council confirms the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 12th of February 2018 as a correct record. Second to Councillor Staines. Any discussion on that one? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Minutes of the community boards. We had got into... Councillor Wiley, you'll do your usual trick.
Yep,
Fire
move
away.
7 to 12.
So you're moving that the minutes of the 6 community boards be seconded. Councillor O'Malley, any discussion on any of those? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, we're on to the substantive part of the meeting, the reports, draft statements of intent to Dunedin City Holdings Limited Group of Companies. Welcome, Mr. Crombie. And welcome, Graham. So, can I just, before you start, Mr. Crombie, I'll ask my Chief Executive to just explain the process we're going to go through in the event that anyone wants to make any suggestions about the statements of intent and how...
We had a discussion this morning, Gemma and the new Chief Financial Officer and Gavin and I, about the process if you want to suggest changes to the statements of intent. You'll remember we asked for your input to the letters of expectation, and that formed the first tranches of any amendments made from the statements of intent from last year. Having seen a bit of discussion about potentially a couple of other changes, what we thought would work well is this: if rather than try and write it by committee today, ask any questions you like, but if you email any changes that you would like through to me, and I'll have discussion if we need in order to make to get them kind of clear and specific within a week. So by this time next week, we'll then send them to DCHL, to Gemma, and she'll then send them through to the relevant company if it's a company issue rather than a DCHL issue. They'll come back to us with a, yes, that's easily doable, or here's the cost of that, or anything that they want you to know. We'll bring a paper to the next Finance and CCO committee outlining the list of changes without anybody's name by them, but with basically a list of the things that have been sent through in public domain, and with high level the DCHL/company response. At that point, you get to have a vote as to which ones you would like us to make as formal suggestions to DCHL. So we then, once you voted, we then formally ask the companies to make changes. We make suggestions for changes to their statements of intent, and there's a subsequent process. They go away, they assess them formally against their business plans and so on, and come back with formal response. And then at the next Finance and CCOs, we get their response, and there's a potential, if we're in disagreement, to take another step if we want to, or if we're in agreement, then the changes are made and adopted.
Just to be clear, that is not, I'm not, and neither is the Chief, endeavouring to encourage necessarily a lot of changes, but we have to be consistent with the legislation, the legislative process for this, which sets out certain steps that we are required to take in interacting with the companies on their statements of intent. Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just to round off that process, though, for clarity, if the suggestions that are supported at that first committee meeting aren't incorporated, Council or that committee still have the power to direct by resolution that things be included or not?
At the first meeting, so that's in a month's time, that will be just to vote on which ones we want to formally suggest. So this first month is an informal process, then you vote, because there's no vote. I mean, if you send stuff to me in the next week, there's no telling whether one of you wants it or all of you. So then we have a public meeting where you get to vote on which changes you support or don't. Then we make that as a formal request to DCHL and the companies. They formally come back with their response, and they want to either make them or not, and then there's a process by which we can require and so on after that second meeting.
Councillor.
Sorry, if I could just add in to some help on there, perhaps the piece missing. We do have a workshop scheduled for the 17th of April, which I think is the time when you will have made some calls around that'll allow us to have a good discussion as well. So I think, Councillor Hawkins, that probably helps the process so that everybody knows where we're at. Bearing
in mind the workshop is just to talk about the process for CCOs, for statements of intent, for how they work. It's not to make decisions. So there isn't a decision-making workshop. The decisions have to come back in public papers. So the purpose of the workshop is simply to raise questions where you don't understand or where you need more information.
Right. Got the process sorted. Mr. Crombie.
Thank you, Dave. Firstly, I just would formally introduce Gemma Adams. If you've not officially met Gemma, Gemma is DCHL's new group manager, I think is what we're calling it. So Gemma is the go-to point for DCHL from there, and she'll be working closely with that. So I've decided that if she sits on my shoulder today, any questions, you'll find me just turning to my left and saying, Gemma, what's the answer? It's pretty straightforward. You have in front of you in your papers today the draft statement of intent, so just to re-emphasise, these are the first cuts from there. I'd make a couple of points if I could. The Dunedin City Holdings statement of intent has been reviewed to ensure that it's in line with the letter of expectation received from council. Okay, so make sure that actually sits in play. The subsidiary company's wording is yet to reflect that, but that will be back to back into those subsidiary companies. So they're all aware of it. It was just the timing of their meetings didn't allow those words to change before they came through to the time frame here. So you'll see the paragraph in the DCHL one that will be reflected back into the subsidiary companies as we go down there. The second point I would make around these is that you'll see some occasionally reference to the deed of understanding, which is the arrangement that we used to have amongst all the group and the city, that we would use common treasury functions, etc. Those are quietly being adjusted through the constitution process that we've been working through over the last 18 months, and we've just about finalised those now. So you'll see the deed of understanding reference come out of the statement of intent because the same issues are covered in the constitutions of the companies. So we've got the same effect, but you'll see those words change from there. There's a couple of emails been circulated just recently, and I thought if I just addressed a couple of the issues that were in those now, it probably save some questions as we go down. The first, the question around whether the Dunedin City Holdings statement of intent should have the group numbers, which is the holdings company plus all the subsidiaries, or the parent company numbers. Now, our auditors last year, the year before, have required us to put the group numbers in, not the parent company numbers in. Okay, so that's why you're seeing the group sitting in there. And the rationale is that the statement of intent is obviously the intent document, the annual report is the reporting document, and we have to compare the two. So because we report on the group under accounting standards, therefore we're comparing the two as we go from there. Question was raised about where council sees the detail of the parent company, so that's Dunedin City Holdings Limited. So you do see that each quarter when I report back into council, and at the same stage you also receive a separate report that comes through to council. I think it came through in November last year, but there's a separate paper that comes public, which is the detail of the private company, the holding company there. Given the confusion around that, we will make sure that there's a sentence in there that says there will be a separate report for that coming in, so that that's explicit in the statement of intent from there. And other than that, I'm quite happy to answer any questions that I may.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins, you had your hand up front.
Here we go, thank you. Just a question, and maybe I've missed this, or maybe it's a result of the separation of the companies, but can you talk us through the comment around Aurora no longer being a CCO by legal definition under the LGA?
Yeah, so what happens is Aurora is actually an electricity company, or whatever the technical term is, and they are explicitly not part of the normal council processes. Up until now, Aurora and Delta have been intertwined as they've gone through, and so we've always treated them as that scenario. And I think our intent is to treat them as if they are, but that's the technical, by the separation that's gone on, that's the effect of that from there.
So, to the letter of the law, power of council to direct Aurora is more limited than, regardless of your intention to treat it the same.
There are some different things. For instance, the Official Information Act, I think, does not apply to electricity companies, but it does apply to local government CTOs. It's our intent to continue down those processes. Yeah, it's that sort of thing. Yeah.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Amir. I'm not quite sure if this comes into statements of intent, so I'm just going to an example and see if it goes anywhere. We've got a strategy that talks about environmental concerns, environmental strategy. We've also got comments, I think, somewhere about wilding trees, and I think those are the sort of documents that your directors got. And it came up in 2GP frustration with landowners having Dunedin Forest as a neighbour and planting, as is totally entitled to under the existing use rights, Douglas fir. But it doesn't, and you talk in its statement of intent about being sustainable and environmentally friendly. And I'm just wondering, is that and I also appreciate that planting projects are long-term projects and everything like that, but it would appear to me that plantations are only one of the operations of city forests, and that having carbon sinks for carbon credits are also part of the operation. that could be considered at least adjoining landowners, for adjoining landowners and control of wild and trees. Is that an issue that you can deal with, or can we direct you to in the statements of intent?
My suggestion would be you raise that issue through the Chief Executive and back into Gemma, and we'll make sure that City Forest has an approach and a response to that so that we can have a sensible conversation about it from there. Okay. Yep.
Councillor Vandervis.
Further to Councillor Hawkins, trying to make some fine distinctions between DCHL Group, Parent, Aurora and Delta. Is it fair enough to think of DCHL Parent as you, the parent company, and DCHL Group as the children that you've got to look after, that you're responsible for?
No, if I put my accountant's brain on, I would say if you looked at the parent company set of accounts, we effectively have an investment number in each one of our companies. So if you looked at our balance sheet, it would say investment Aurora, investment Delta, investment Dunedin Airport, investment Torrey Gorge, those numbers there. The group account, which in fact says, okay, what does that group do, cuts out the investment and the share capital effectively and records the whole group's performance going right through. Okay, so the group reporting says everything that sits under DCHL, all its subsidiaries and investments are reported as a performance there.
Thank you for that clarification. The SOI requirements, is it DCHL Parent that actually looks to compliance of members of the group for SOI? And is it able to get the same compliance out of Aurora now that they're not quite the same kind of company as Delta?
Yes, it is DCHL that does that, and yes, the answer is yes, we can, because the directors are signing up to that statement of intent, which they intend to be held to.
So it doesn't matter whether it's Aurora or Delta or any of the other companies, if they do something that we want to question regarding their SOI, those questions need to go through you,
DCHL,
and then you basically deal with them
yes.
at arm's length from us.
Correct.
Okay, that's very helpful. Also included in some of the email questions that have been floated around councillors is an equity injection of $2,550,000.
Yep.
Can you just give us some background on that, and is there any precedent for us doing that?
So what that payment is the agreed upon equity investment into Dunedin Stadium Properties Limited, okay, to make sure that because remember when council dropped the rental from 4 million to 2 million in the stadium, this is the transaction that makes up the $2 million difference to allow the debt to be paid. Previously, that company was owned by council, so it just came straight from council into the company. Now, because Dunedin City Holdings owns the property company, there has to be a transfer of funds between council through the holding company down to property to allow that debt to be paid. What the 2.5 million is the share capital which is being called in the holding company to move those funds down exactly as it was previously. It's just another part in there. So that's what that is.
So it's essentially monies coming from the ratepayers pool to make a legal separation with the stadium's ownership?
No, well, perhaps. So as part of the funding mechanism for the stadium through the reset a couple of years ago, there's rental income that comes in from Dunedin Venues Management, and there's a call on capital, a share call on the shareholder, which is ultimately Dunedin City, which puts the money into the company to pay the loans back. So with the change of ownership from the property company from City into Holdings, there has to be a way of moving that money between the City into the property company.
This is it.
That's done by the way the shares thing,
Okay.
so that's what it is. It's the same as it was before, it's just in a different vehicle.
And just to tie it off completely, have we had to do that in the past, or is this a new thing?
No, we've been doing this since the start. Yeah.
So
Since the start of the stadium repayment schedule. So there's a repayment schedule each year of how much capital is to be called. Yep.
Right, but prior to the stadium, we didn't have this kind of mechanism?
No, this is a vehicle to pay for the stadium.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you. Just to clarify the point around the difference between what you're legally required to and how you will treat Aurora as a CCO, will you continue to extend the availability of information that isn't required of it under Lagoima, but the intention is that they will still be made available as it currently has been historically?
That is the conversation we have had with the board, yes.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Wilson.
Just understanding the relationships and where this is. Things like administrative matters like Lagoima or relationships even with council, is that dealt with under the deed or under the statements of intent?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I can answer that. So when you say relationships to council, our intent is to do that through statement of intent, because there's a letter of expectation on how council would hope to work. That's replicated by us in our statement of intent about how we hope to work. So that lines up. So that's where that would go. Lagoima is a separate matter altogether, I think, from there.
And, okay. And well, I'm just going to pick out again one more, and it's Aurora talking about electric vehicle uptake, which talks about the number of charging stations. Is again, if we expected them to have a number of electric vehicles themselves to be the key driver or the key measure, that would be one that we can raise again through Sue, Dr. Bidrose.
Yeah, and I would suggest you would, if I could counsel the councillor
Yes.
politely,
Appreciate that.
rather than say you should have 10, you might want to
Say,
say
can
there's
you
a
give-
policy to
Yes, yep.
move towards, or something like that. And
I certainly wouldn't want to. Yeah, thank you.
yeah, being the distinction between.
Indeed.
Yep, that's it. Well done.
Further questions? Councillor O'Malley.
I'm actually just going to follow up on that very thing about electric vehicles. I just want to get a clarification around the performance measure on new charging stations. The way I read it, it looks like you plan to have 3, well, Aurora plans to have 3 by 2019 and then add 1 more and then 1 more. Is that correct? Is that a correct?
I'm sorry, I don't know the
So it's got 3, 4, 5 next to 2019 and
Okay.
2020, 2021.
Yep.
So, and that's for the whole network, which would be Central Otago and Dunedin, right?
It would be under the Aurora piece, yeah. So yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know.
So
the
as we
detail
go
of that.
forward, understanding our relationship, if we would be looking to make sure that Aurora is aligned with things like the GPS that will be coming out and the regional land transport plan with...
And I think that's the question, isn't it? Okay, how are you going to be aligned with? Yeah, show us how you can
And
do
is adding one
Yeah.
an alignment in that
That's
regard.
it.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Graham, just looking at the dividend subvention payments or distributions across the companies. So I'm looking at that. My quick estimation was 6.5 million is predicted for the year end in 19, 7 million for year end 20, and 7 million for year 21. So I take it that's what we're expecting, or council will receive?
Yes, it is. Yeah, so we've been very clear that we want to make sure that, so ultimately, I think it's 5.902 million, which in this straight distribution from DCHL, that is done in the form of an interest payment for the most effective way of doing that. And as previously indicated, the dividend flows from Aurora, which they are being held while we do that capital, to the reset comes from the Commerce Commission, which is 2021, I think. So yeah, I think, sorry, I should probably make the point, there's some comments around losses being shown. That if you remember in the briefings I talk about operating cash flow as being the key number. That number sits around 28 to 30 million over the next 3 years consistently across the year. And that operating cash flow, free cash flow, is the one that allows us to make some decisions about where to invest. So that's quite strong. Yep.
Councillor Vance.
The slightly different status that the Aurora network has, because it's a network, does it still fall into the category of a council-controlled organisation, or does it stand out completely on its own now? Is it separated completely from the other companies?
I'm not sure. So certainly there's a definition that it sits under the Some Act from where it sits in the company and the rest of it. Our intent through the statement of intents is it stays the same from there. So technically, I can't give you the legal answer, Councillor, but I can. Their intent is to operate it as if it is. It's because of the separation of Aurora and Delta that we now have this definition coming through.
And the Aurora Network company then is, in fact, now a completely separated unit.
Yes, it is, from the 1st of July
And
last year.
does that then make it easier to sell, for instance, if that was something we wanted to do further on down the track?
Does it make it easier? It's always easier if you've got something wrapped up, but I don't know. There's no sale in the process at the moment.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr Crombie, I just wondered if you could articulate something for me. In item number 18, with regards to DCHL, it talks about accountability, constructive working practices, and I'm really interested to hear, in theory, how you, just to articulate how you would see the process working if, for example, council had an issue with one of the subsidiaries, one of the CCOs. Clearly that goes through you, and I just wondered if you could just talk us through how that would work, or back the other way.
So the examples, we've had several examples in the last 6 months where councillors have raised an issue, or that's come to me or Gemma's equivalent, either through the Mayor or the Chief Executive. At that stage, we go and talk with the individuals in the company. I will talk to the Chair from that piece, and if there's some further stuff required, that goes down, and then it just works its way back up, and we report back into the individual who has asked that question. So either if it's come from the Mayor, I'll report back to the Mayor, or the Chief Executive, I come back to Sue from there. Yep.
Any further questions? Councillor Lord.
Graham, my question is perhaps not quite as direct as to do with the statement of intents, but just trying to work out. So Aurora is projecting to spend about $720 million, and yet when we look at the debt's not going to increase by anything like that, so the expectation is that almost half of that is going to be carried out of their working capital. And so what I'm trying to work out is, and I was actually looking at page 38, 169, the percentage of shareholders' funds to total assets. I'm just trying to think, is the expectation, and it's not directly to do with this, but the expectation that at some point, maybe 4 years, 5 years out, there should be either a significant change to that percentage. If they're going to pay half of that over the next 10 years out of working capital,
Yep.
They're going to get to a point where they're no longer needing that working capital to do the job because the job will have been done. Now, is the expectation that after that they will still have to keep renewing the network, so we will be no better off, or will we get to a point where either the debt will be reduced quite significantly and the return to dividends?
Yeah, so it is the latter scenario from there. So you recall in the network situation, there's a Commerce Commission DPP reset, which is the general one. That resets in 2021. I keep saying that. I think it's 2021. From there, that will change the revenue number that comes in. Okay. At the same stage, Aurora are likely to look for a CPP, which is the customised price path one, which means there'll be some specific stuff for Aurora that would also get added into that. So that will increase the revenue number. The long-term budgets, the last lot that I've seen, show that they do spend the $720 million across the 10 years of the asset management plan. That kicks up about 2023. It starts to come over the top of the hunt, and debt starts to be being repaid. If you look across the DCHL group, and that's the thing people got to keep remembering, so when you look at the number of debt in the DCHL, that includes the city, okay, because Dunedin City Treasury is one of our subsidiaries. So I think the city's debt number gets up to about 280 at some point. Aurora gets up to about 260, somewhere in there. The total debt we have sitting around potentially is around about that 800 at the peak of where that is, and that's out in 2024 or 2025, somewhere around about there. So in answer to your question, Mike, yes, Aurora comes back into profitability in about 3 years' time, and while the program will continue, at that stage dividends will resume.
Supplementary question, if I may. So after that 10-year plan, do you have an idea, well, will it be, if you were still sitting in that chair in 10 years' time, would your expectation be after that capital is spent, where will Aurora be spending after that? Will they be spending sufficient to maintain their network properly and well?
They will, and I think there's two parts to that question. So there's a hump we're going over now, which is some catch-up work that goes through, and then there'll be a level. So remember, they were spending about 35 million a year on capital. They're currently spending around about 70 million a year. Halfway, at some point, they will come over that hump and go into a maintenance rotation program. The challenge will be the change in technology. Okay, so at some point the current network structure will change, and someone was speaking earlier about batteries and the rest of that. There'll be a whole change of that technology piece. Aurora will need to respond to that. Yep.
Councillor van der Vis.
Again, on page 38, if we look at the term loans for 19, 20 and 21, they increase by more than $50 million every year, up to $800 million.
Yes.
That increase in term loans, debt, how will that be reflected, in your opinion, just looking forward now? You're only looking forward 3 years, we're going up to 800 million. How will that extra debt be reflected in the value of the company that we put this money into, or that this money is going into?
So remember, the 800 million includes the best part of 280 million in the city, 90 in the stadium, and then a whole range of other stuff. So if you're talking about Aurora,
it's the all up.
Yeah. So if you're talking about Aurora specifically,
no, I'm talking about the increases each year. I'm talking about more than 50 million each year. The stadium has nothing to do with that.
no, that's the increase. So the increase comes from Aurora and from the city, and the spends. So that's where the increase comes in debt.
From Aurora and from the city.
Yes. Remember, your city debt at the moment is about 200, Sue, from memory, and you're looking at projections in your 10-year plan, I think, to getting to 280, somewhere in there. So that's part of that increase as well.
So a substantial chunk of that is Aurora, but
Aurora and the city are the two key ones. Everybody else is reasonably flat, and their debt. Yep.
And for the substantial part that's going into Aurora, does that give us a Aurora company that is going to be at least that much more valuable?
Yes, it does, because remembering, as those assets are added into the network, the company is able to recoup revenue off those assets. And so therefore their revenue line goes up, which means the value of the company goes up as well. So yes, the answer to your question is yes, you do get a return.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any further questions? Right, we'll move on to the resolutions. You're going to move, Councillor Lord. Now, I suggest, I've just chatted to the CEO, in light of her explanation as to the process hereafter, I suggest that that A stays the same as it is, but B is that we note that councillors will provide comments to the CEO, if required, on the draft statements of intent by 1st of May 2000.
By the 27th of February.
27th of February. I'm glad you corrected me on. Thank you. So the two resolutions are that the first one stays the same, and the second one is that we note that councillors will provide comments, if required, to the CEO on the draft statements of intent by 27th of February. Is there a seconder? You're seconding it? Move, Councillor Lord. Seconder, Councillor Staines. Discussion. Would you wish to speak to it in the first instance, Councillor Lord?
No, I'm happy.
No. Any speakers? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Mr. Crombie. Thank you, Gemma. Right, on to item 14, the establishment of a waste assessment and waste management and minimisation plan steering group. I think Ms. Mash and Mr. Henderson are coming up. Is that right? Or do you just want to come up and answer questions? Well, stay there and answer questions if they are required. I'm happy. Might as well come up. Welcome. Can I take this opportunity to welcome you, Ms Mash. This is your first council meeting, I've just been advised. So, right, would you wish to preface this, or do you want to go straight into questions? Take it as read, and if any questions from anybody on this, please. Councillor Wilson?
You need that.
Right. So, no questions? Councillor Van Bust? Oh, you've got a question.
Unfortunately, Councillor Hall's not here at the moment, but my understanding is that Councillor Hall has an extraordinarily long experience in this area, and I'm wondering if not in this particular vehicle, if there is any other vehicle that Councillor Hall's experience of waste management could be called upon in a way that will benefit us all. Councillor,
I'll let the CEO address that question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, we also had that discussion because of his experience, but obviously because he is actively and heavily working in that market, there's a conflict of interest which is pretty near impossible to avoid. So we have that discussion with him regularly, aside from asking him questions, which we do from time to time when we need that form of assistance in the areas where there's no conflict of interest, and here I think we have that understanding pretty well between him and us.
I certainly understand that the very significant conflict of interest, because he trades very heavily in this, I hate to use the word space, but I suppose it is one. The issue that I wonder, though, that we might perhaps do a bit more to benefit from his experience of, especially...
Oh, do you want to hold this till the discussion, unless this is another question?
It's a question.
Oh, right.
And the question really is, would it not be possible for staff to have a question sort of answer situation with Councillor Hall on his now long and public suggestions that there are ways that we could have literally a zero waste going to the landfill, and that we could do quite a bit more in the way of waste minimisation than we do now. Is it possible for you to have these discussions with Councillor Hall, despite the fact that there's obviously a conflict there, but as an information gathering exercise? Basically, I'm just asking, is it possible for you to pick Councillor Hall's brains on these? Because as I see it, there's a fairly unique opportunity here.
I suspect it's difficult for staff to do so, and it may be somewhat easier for the councillors involved to do so and to manage that on the way through. So that's a discussion perhaps to have with them.
Councillor O'Malley, I'm conscious that you may be wanting to answer this question as well as ask one, but anyway.
Come in the form of help get an answer on that one. That is the stakeholder engagement, and part 4 includes identifying key people, including industry representatives. So through that mechanism, would be able to deal with Councillor Hall issue. Thanks.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Essentially 2 questions which you may be able to answer at the same time. First off, if someone can inform me, what process was taken into appoint both Councillor O'Malley and Councillor Newell? And secondly, what is the total makeup of the steering group, or the participants of the steering group?
Thank you, Councillor. This is the process for appointment. So this is the discussion and for resolution today. And do we have a paragraph that specifies? Point 8, paragraph A, on whatever page number you have. Sorry, I don't. So you have there the Group Manager of Waste and Environmental Solutions. Our own staff are involved, policy advisors. We'll have a Otago Regional Council. Members may reach out to technical experts as they deem appropriate. And then we'll have engagement through the usual community consultation that we do with Council.
Okay, so we'll start with the first question then. I guess I'm asking, there's 2 councillors being looked at being appointed to this committee, and just wondering why those two particular councillors were being appointed. Or
I'd clarify, and Ms Mash's original statement, this is the process of appointment. They're not appointed. They're not being appointed unless we appoint them. But my understanding is that they expressed interest.
So through the chair, Councillor O'Malley is our deputy chair for our committee, and it was through discussions with our chair and Councillor O'Malley that the name of the other councillor was put forward.
Thank you. So, and I looked at paragraph 8 and A. So I'm trying to get an understanding, like for example, is there going to be an ORC councillor involved? How big is the panel going to be, the steering group going to be? Is it one of those things that's defined, or is it going to be just whatever space? Yeah, it could be 8 people, is it going to be 12 people? Or is there no fixed number?
So through the chair, we will communicate with the ORC, and then it's really a decision of theirs as to whether it's a technical expert from their staff or an elected rep. And yes, I suppose there's some fluidity around the exact number depending on the skill set we find ourselves with. So what you have in 8A is indicative of who will be part of the steering group.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you for that clarity, and I'm supportive of the motion and very happy, as I said, to move. But the question I have is, presumably, given the flexibility you've suggested and that the ORC was working across the region, it may actually include other councils if they so wished to join in this opportunity potentially?
Yes, I never close my mind off to expertise. We have a role there with consultation with our regional councils and our other district councils, and some of that work, I suppose, can then come out of the 17A review work that we've already done across the region to inform this. So there's been previous discussions around solid waste as a whole with the other Otago councillors and the OIC as part of that group. So some of the information that's come out of that process will go on to inform this process.
Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have no interest in joining the steering group. But to appease the concerns
That would be a waste.
To appease the concerns of those who may feel left out by this appointment process, can we get assurance from staff that there'll be plenty of opportunity for elected member input in the revision of the waste management and minimisation plan as that process evolves?
So through the chair, I understand that interest in this particular subject is high amongst all councillors, and yes, there will be ample opportunity for you to contribute either through workshop processes or through formal discussion with papers to council.
Councillor Vandervis.
Hello. Mayor Cull has suggested that the two councillors were proposed had expressed an interest. Are you happy that all councillors were made aware that there was a potential to express an interest in this particular area? What is the process of advising councillors that these positions are coming along?
I don't think there is a process for that. It came through, as it was explained, it came through Infrastructure Committee. This is one of their areas of jurisdiction, and that's why the Deputy Chair of Infrastructure has been suggested, because it was through that committee that the...
So that would also be why I, for instance, never heard about it until I saw it in the papers. Thank you.
Any further questions?
Just wanted to ask a question, if it was okay, about any preparations for the heavy rain, any concerns. Obviously, but that was to be asked later.
Catch up. Okay. Would someone care to move? Move Councillor Wilson, second to Councillor Staines. Councillor Wilson, do you wish to speak to this? Right. Further speakers. Councillor O'Malley.
I just want to hope that as we go forward with this committee that we do actually have inclusion of everybody who wants to have an input into this. And I am conscious of what you just said, Councillor Vandervis. And maybe as we go forward, we will talk about how we do fill up these committees as we go on. No intention, though, on my behalf to exclude anybody from the selection. I just knew that Councillor Newell had told me at that point, asked if we ever did this, he'd be interested, and I, as a Deputy Chair, had put my interest forward. Thank you.
Further speakers? Being none, I'll put it, or unless you wish to exercise your right of reply, Councillor Wilson. Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Leanne. Councillor appointment to the Strathtyre Community Board. Sandy. Right, well, I don't want everyone squabbling over this position, all right? Order, please. Sandy, welcome.
Thanks.
Would you like to preface the matter with any questions? There being none, would someone like to move the resolution? Councillor Wilson, second to Councillor Newell. Any discussion? Councillor Gary.
With apologies to Mark Twain, news of my resignation has been greatly exaggerated. Just for clarity, I'm resigning from the Strathtyre Community Board and then from the Community Board's Executive Committee, which is the National Executive, and that is all I'm resigning from.
Thank you. Any further discussion or clarification? All right, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Sandy. That was... Right, I'll move from the Chair that pursuant to the provisions of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act, we exclude the public from the following part of the proceedings as per the order paper. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried.